Alright, so as stated previously, hopefully you have already looked in your drive and opened up the Chapter 5, Section 1, Geography of India. Now this is a slideshow, and what I have done, just as we have completed in class before, I have left blanks on the slideshow, and as we go over these things you can fill in the main points as we talk about them. Okay, so make sure you have Chapter 5, Section 1, Geography of India open, and we will go ahead and start talking about some things about the geography of early India, and then also some of the first civilizations in that area. As we looked at on Tuesday, of course, our topic throughout the next couple of weeks is Ancient India, and that is Chapter 5 out of your textbook. The Chapter 5 essential question, so the question that we're going to be looking at throughout this chapter, deals with how do India's rich history and culture affect the world today. We will talk about several things throughout this chapter and the topics on ancient India that really have impacted still what we see today throughout the entire world, especially on the basis of religion, but also in some other things as well. So hopefully by the end of this, you will be able to completely and thoroughly answer and be able to recognize the answer to this question, starting off as we look at things today. So Section 1 deals with the geography of ancient India and also the people of ancient India themselves, the early settlers in the area around the Indus River and also in other parts of what is today northern India. Okay, so Section 1 deals mainly with the geography and the early peoples of this area. To our map right here, you can very easily see, okay, how the area of India, so if we were to look at India on the map, you can very easily see the size of the country itself. Look at the size of the country. It has a very large land mass, and that's what I was talking about. And then you can see by the concentration of electricity there at night how the population is scattered throughout the entire country. Okay, so let me jump back through these points and get back to our main information here. Many geographers actually refer to India as a subcontinent. Okay, so you should be able to tap on that line there and fill in the word subcontinent. And what does that mean? A large landmass that is smaller than a continent. Okay, so India itself is not a continent. However, it is a large landmass that is smaller than a continent, but still has a very large size. Now, the Indian subcontinent has many different geographic features. Those geographic features are important to why people settled there. They're important, of course, to how the weather affects people living in that area. Now, first of all, as you notice there, rivers and melting snow kept the plains fertile. Just as around the Tigris and Euphrates and also the Nile, okay, the Indus River provided fertile soil for the inhabitants of those early civilizations. Okay, so the second point there is that both sides of the Indus River thrived. And what does it mean to thrive? It meant that the civilizations were successful, okay, because both the western, eastern sides of the river had fertile soil, and so people could live there and able to farm successfully. Not only was the river important, but also the mountains were important. Okay, these provided natural barriers, and we've looked at that already on several occasions. Natural barriers. So to the north, you have the Himalayas. Okay, or as Bear Grylls pronounces it, if you've ever seen him on Discovery Channel, the Himalayas. Okay, the Himalayas are the highest mountains in the world. So if you were trying to come into the area of India from the north, you're going to have a hard time trekking across the highest mountains in the world. Okay, the highest mountain, in fact, is Mount Everest, and it is located along the Himalaya chain. But you also have an area to the west known as the Hindu Kush. Okay? And this area also provided protection from enemies. So you have the Hindu Kush to the west, and you have the mountains of the Himalayas to the north. And I will show you a picture of these here in just a second that will be able to give you a better sense on this. Okay? And of course, let's talk about water for just a second. Something that you see occurring on the Indian subcontinent is this term known as a monsoon or monsoons. Now, we think of a monsoon when we say, man, it's monsooning outside. We think of very strong rain, just rain beating down. Okay? But the true definition of monsoons are seasonal wind that cause wet and dry seasons. Okay, so yes, monsoons can deal with rain, but yet they can also deal with the patterns that cause wet and dry seasons. Of course, it contributes to heavy rainfall, and civilizations arose around this seasonal rainfall. Now, we've talked about already the major points of Indian geography. So you have the Indus River, you have the mountains as protection, then you also have the monsoons, or the fact that much rainfall falls in the area. So let me show you some images of this and hopefully clarify it a little bit. First of all, one of the major areas of early civilization in India was around the area that is shaded there in the yellow. That is around the Indus River. Okay, or the Indus River Valley. But what's unique is that you also see, okay, several rivers that flow throughout the northern border of India. So here you have the Ganges Delta. You have other rivers that flow through the heart right here of India. And so the Indus River was important in the earliest times, but then you have also other rivers that were vital for civilization as well on the Indian subcontinent. Then, let's talk about the mountains that provided some protection to the people of early India, and those were the Himalayas. Okay? So, the Himalayas, as we discussed on the previous slide, is the longest not the longest, but they are the highest mountains in the world. So again, natural barrier. But you also have this area known as the Hindu Kush. Okay? The Hindu Kush provided much protection as well to the west. And then last of all, we talked about the idea of the monsoons. Now, looking at this map, and you also have this on your screens, notice the variation of arrows. Okay, these are wind patterns. If you look at the map key there at the bottom, you will notice the red looking arrows that are moving towards the south and west. Those are dry monsoon airflows, okay, which happen during the winter. Okay, so the air is moving off the subcontinent of India, causing the dry seasons to occur there. Contrastly, look at the blue or the purple. Of course, y'all know I'm colorblind. So either of the two colors, just notice how they are flowing in from the sea. Those are the wet monsoons. Okay, those are during the summer months, and those are bringing rain to the Indian subcontinent. So you have the red as the dry monsoon, and the blue or the purple there as the wet. So we've looked at already the importance of the geography of India and how it played a role in why people wanted to live there and settle there. Okay, so let's talk about these earliest peoples of the area of India. They are known as, the Harappan civilization. The Harappan civilization. Now, first of all, let's look at the people of the Harappan civilization. Notice here again, just fill in the major blanks as we go along. First of all, populations grew in the Indus River Valley. Just as we talked about in earlier chapters, okay, people started to settle along the river valleys, and what happened? They had a surplus of crops, okay? People began to settle in small towns and cities, and before long you start having larger populations. Now, growth came as irrigation and farming techniques improved. So when people start to have enough food again, we talked about a surplus, people began to settle in more large amounts. Next of all, let's talk about the major cities of the Harappan civilization. Okay, there were several cities that were a part of this civilization, and I will illustrate that for you on a map as well. Okay, but I want to show you and to tell you and talk about briefly the major cities that first, okay, arose in this area. The first one is simply Harappa. Okay, the Harappan civilization was named after the modern city of Harappa, Pakistan. Okay, so the modern city of Harappa, Pakistan. It was near this city that ruins of the civilization were first discovered. So around this city of Pakistan, you see the discovery of a lot of these ancient ruins. Okay, archaeologists, think that the civilization thrived between 2300 and 1700 years before the birth of Christ. Okay, so a lot of the information that we have from these early Indian civilizations comes from the ruins of the city of Harappa, and then the second one is one of my favorite words to pronounce, Mohenjo-daro. Okay, Mohenjo-daro. And this was another important city in the early times of the Harappan civilization. Both Harappa and Mohenjo-daro were well-planned cities. Okay, they had public areas that were planned out. They had city streets. They had storehouses, workshops, houses in general, and also they had many public wells or sources of water. Another unique thing is that both cities had fortresses for defense, so they were protected against the defending, and helping them to defend the people that may have been trying to attack them. So they were fortressed or fortified cities of protection. And then last of all, let's talk about some of the achievements. Okay, some of the achievements of the Harappan civilization. Well, I mentioned them just a second ago. Wells and indoor plumbing. Okay, the Harappan civilization was very advanced. Most houses actually had bathrooms with indoor plumbing. Now, we take that for granted today, but how many of you in here, okay, don't raise your hands because I'm not here. I'm just on the video, remember. But anyway, how many of you would like to have to go out to an outhouse, okay, every time you wanted to use the restroom, like we used to have to, okay? So they had indoor plumbing. Artisans made excellent pottery, okay, and jewelry, ivory objects, and clothing made of cotton. They also used high-quality tools, okay, that used a system of weights and measures, okay, to help them in the things that they constructed and did on a daily basis. Another thing is that India's first writing system occurred during the Harappan civilization. But notice there in the parentheses, it's very interesting because scholars have not yet been able to read this language. Okay? So we know very little about Harappan society because we cannot read the language. Now you think, well, how is that possible? With the technology we have today and with the means that we have as a civilization to do things, we can't read their language, but we can't. That's very unique, okay? And until we maybe archaeologists or historians or somebody uncovers more tools, it may be something that is never translated. Just like hieroglyphics, until the finding of what stone again? The Rosetta Stone, okay, we were not able to translate hieroglyphics. So that's a very unique thing about Harappan civilization. This slide, why do you think that a lot and most of the majority of the cities were around the river valley. Okay, now we've talked about these major points already. I want you to take a minute, just a second, and where it says type your answer here, you should be able to hit enter, and I want you to type your answer of why early major settlements were around the area of the Indus Valley. Okay, so take a minute, just a second, and go ahead and type in your answer. Okay, so most of you have probably had time to type your answer in there. If you haven't, that's okay. But answer the question for me. Why do you think many of the early major settlements were around the area of the Indus Valley? Well, of course, we've talked about this now for the majority of the year so far, is because of the importance of the resources. Okay, they had the water of the Indus River and other rivers around to support farming. They could also travel along the river. They could use that for getting from one place to another. They could use it as a food source for catching fish, and they were able to use the water successfully, that resource of water, in order to settle there and to have a thriving area or community of people, or an early civilization. Okay? But now let's look at what happens, okay, following the Harappan civilization. Not long after the Harappan civilization crumbled, okay, and many say that it ended probably by the early 1700s before Christ or BC, but no one is really sure why. It could have been because of invaders, natural disasters like a flood or earthquake caused this civilization to collapse. But when the Harappan civilization did dissipate around 1700, Central Asians called Aryans began taking over territory. Okay, Aryans. Those are the people who came in to the area of the Indian subcontinent and began taking over following the dissipation of the Harappan civilization. So notice the arrows here on the bottom image. Okay, the Aryans migrated from the region, okay, around the Caspian Sea, just north and west probably of the Caspian Sea in Central Asia. So they moved to the south and to the east, and over time they were able to come in to the area in which we have been looking at. Okay, south and east of the Hindu Kush and south of the Himalayas in the river valleys of northern India. So the Aryans began taking over territory. So now let's talk a little bit about the Aryan civilization. Who were these people? What did they do? What impact did they have on the area of India? Well, first of all, let's talk a little bit about their religion. Okay, the Aryans left behind vast collections, or many collections, of poems, hymns, myths, and rituals. Okay? They also had religious writings that were called Vedas. Okay? Vedas. So these texts were left behind. They were written by Aryan priests. And they are very unique to look at today. We learn things about the religion of the Aryans because of the poems, hymns, myths, and rituals that were left behind. Okay? And also those religious writings known as the Vedas. Now what about the government? Well, there was no central government. Unlike other ancient civilizations, for a time, the Aryans did not have a centralized government. They had small communities ruled by Rajas. Okay? They were ruled by Rajas, who was a leader who ruled a village and the land around it. Okay? So instead of having a central governmental leader, they had individual leaders of the villages and the lands around it. They lived in small communities based on mainly family ties, okay? And so no single ruling authority existed, like in the Harappan civilization. And then let's talk last of all here about the Aryan language, okay? And this is important as well because we will talk more about this, but the most important language of ancient India is referred to as Sanskrit. Okay, Sanskrit. Now, the first Aryan settlers did not read or write. Okay, they memorized most of their poems and hymns, such as the Vedas. But later on, okay, they developed language known as Sanskrit. Okay, and they composed these things that we mentioned above under religion, these poems, myths, hymns, religious writings. They composed them in the language of Sanskrit. Now, at first, Sanskrit was only a spoken language, so it wasn't actually written down. But eventually, people figured out how to write it down so that they could keep records. So that they could keep records and other things, okay? And these Sanskrit records are a major source of information about Aryan society. Now, Sanskrit is no longer spoken today. It's one of those lost languages, and we'll talk about several of those throughout the year, but it is no longer spoken today. However, it is the root of many modern South Asian languages that is still spoken. So several things are taken from the language of Sanskrit that is used in other South Asian languages today. So in summary, let's take a look at the things that we discussed today. First of all, it's not mentioned on this slide, but we talked about the geography of ancient India and the importance that it had on people living there. You had the monsoons, okay? You also had the importance of the river valleys settling around a water source. Then you had the Hindu Kush as a natural barrier, and also the Himalayas, the largest, okay, or highest mountain chain. I keep wanting to say largest, but they are the highest mountains in the world. Now, the first people to actually settle there were the Harappans. The two major cities were the city of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, and they were the first advanced civilization that thrived in this region of India, okay, around the years 2300 to 1700 BC. Their culture was important, their artistry, and the fact that they planned out their cities and where they lived very carefully. After the demise or the dissipation of the Harappan civilization, we get to the Aryans, okay? They were the people from Central Asia, South Asian warriors who pushed through the Hindu Kush and settled in the Indus Valley. Their oral tradition and religion and mythology resulted in the most important language of ancient India, and that is Sanskrit. So you should have a pretty good idea about the earliest times of Indian civilization now. That is part due to the geography, and we have now identified the earliest settlers of the region. We will go on from here to talk about other things that arise in this region. Okay, they are two major world religions, one being Buddhism, the other being Hinduism. You watched a video or a documentary either on Wednesday or Thursday, okay, depending upon which day, what period I had you. Wednesday we were here half a day, and then Thursday the first part was taken up by the ACT Explorer test. But you watched a video documentary about Siddhartha Gautama, okay, who was the person who really was the man who started, okay, the concept of Buddhism, and now it is a thriving, okay, practicing religion across the entire globe, as well as the religion of Hinduism. So we will look at these two as we move forward talking about India. But what I'd like for you to do now is to go ahead and look at this link that I've provided for you. Okay, now that you have learned a little bit about the geography of ancient India and some of the early civilizations, I want to test your comprehension very quickly. There's a set of 5 questions that I want you to answer. You can follow this link, okay? So if you click on this link right here, you may have to actually copy and paste it into a web browser page, but this is a short 5-question test your knowledge from today's notes. Now you can use your notes to answer these, okay? So by all means, take a look at your notes and answer these questions. Do your very best, take your time, make sure you submit those. Now when you get finished, go back to this page if you exit off of it, and I want you to go to this website right down here, okay? So you should see the kind of the pointer down here that gives you more information about the Indus Valley. Okay, I want you to click on the different links on this site. If you have trouble following the link, like as above, just copy and paste it into a web page, okay, and hit enter and it will go to the site. So after you answer the 5 questions, explore this site. Do this for the rest of the class period. Okay, there are several different things on there. You can read and do other things. So please do not get on anything else. It's not a time to play games. However, it is a time for you to learn a little bit more from what we have talked about. So hopefully today, as you get finished with the next activities, that you understand, okay, the geography of ancient India and why it was important, and then also the early civilizations. And we'll talk about more from this point, and I hope y'all have a good rest of the day.